Now we have a very firm understanding of not only how our various different types of memory work, but also the different criteria we as adult learners need in order to learn effectively. At this point, we're ready to introduce you to something called the SQ3R system, which is designed to fulfill all of these criteria and to effectively put the different types of memory on high alert. If you're a previous student of Become a Super Learner, you'll immediately recognize the SQ3R system, though the name might not be familiar to you from the last course. Okay, so what the heck is an SQ3R? It sounds like some sort of android robot that spends its time hanging out with Luke Skywalker, doesn't it? But in fact, it's a system used in a lot of US schools. It stands for survey, question, read, recall, and review. Each of these steps is a critical part of the superlearner process, at least when the information we're trying to superlearn is written text. For this reason, we've devoted an entire section to pre-reading alone. In the lectures that follow, you'll learn why pre-reading is a speed reader's hidden weapon and how to utilize this skill to enhance curiosity and focus, to improve reading speed, and to boost overall retention. For now, though, here's a summary of what happens during each of these steps. During the survey step, which we also call pre-reading, we skim or scan the content before we read it to prepare our mind for the new information. This is thoroughly covered in the coming lectures. In the question phase, we ask ourselves questions to improve our motivation, such as why we're trying to read and what's in it for us. Clear motivation improves the reading process, and getting to the content from different perspectives improves our understanding. Next, we read, either speed reading or in the normal fashion. When reading, you maximize the benefit of the previous S and Q steps, so you don't have to reread or dwell on irrelevant details. Then we recall. We add details to the markers after reading each paragraph. This is our way to ensure we recall the paragraph. During our speed reading training, we will have to read and recall a text several times until we get 100% retention, and only after several weeks will we really trust the brain to recall automatically. Finally, we review. We analyze the content from multiple perspectives, and we see what we learned, and then we try to connect it to previous knowledge. The fastest readers, like Dr. Lev, will spend more time on this step than on all the previous steps taken together. That's because if you do not review the article properly, it's hard to understand it, and occasionally you will need to revisit it over and over. So, now that we understand the SQ3R model, let's learn how to optimize it, starting out with surveying, or as we call it, pre-reading. Now that you understand the SQ3R methodology, it's time to dive right in with your speed reading training, starting from the top. S for survey. If you look up the verb survey in the dictionary, you'll see a number of definitions. To survey something means to investigate, examine, question, and record information about it. This, in short, is a summary of all the activities we're conducting in our minds during the initial process of speed reading, pre-reading. Now, pre-reading may seem counterintuitive since increasing our speed is one of the intentions of the course, but actually, pre-reading helps us speed up while priming our brain for reading the text with high retention. This is especially important for dense materials or mixed reading with lots of pictures, such as textbooks. Now, I probably wouldn't pre-read a novel for fear of spoiling the plot, but if I do, I'll look for areas of conversation and dialogue, and I'll determine the outline and flow of the chapter. Now, when we pre-read a nonfiction kind of text, we're taking a few seconds per page at a speed of about 5 to 8 times our current reading speed. We're not reading the text, or even trying to. Instead, we're just looking for titles, subheadings, proper nouns, numbers, words, or things that just don't seem to fit in. When we pre-read, we gain an understanding of the structure of the text, and we build a sort of mental map. We start to generate thoughts and ideas about the text, and we think to ourselves, oh, that's interesting. They're going to talk about Buzz Aldrin here, for example. These points of curiosity will serve as temporary markers for now, and we'll be able to upgrade them later with much more detailed, high-quality markers when we actually read the text. The Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, is very helpful here. You see, the Pareto principle says that 80% of something yields 20% of its benefit, and vice versa. So for example, 80% of your friends give you 20% of the love and support you get, while the top 20% give you 80%. This rule can be applied to nearly anything from economics to business to personal relationships, and it can definitely be applied here. You see, in pre-reading, we're looking for those 20% of details that give us an 80% understanding of at least what we're going to be reading, at least what the text is about. In the long term, once you become skilled enough at creating markers, you'll be able to spot and store high-quality markers even in your pre-reading. This means that when you actually read the text, all you have to do is fill in those 2 to 4 detail markers we talked about for each marker, and you're well on your way. This will take a lot of time, but it's a pivotal skill in speed reading, and it'll differentiate skimming from actually learning the content you're reading at a high level. It's important to note that even though you don't register the text, you are building a map of it and becoming more familiar with it subconsciously, just like you begin to understand the layout of a neighborhood even if you drive through it at 40 miles an hour. Don't get frustrated and don't get hung up on understanding the text itself. Just understand the flow and any interesting points of information that might jump out at you. This alone is a major benefit of pre-reading, but as we're about to see, it's not the only one. Now, it's time to remind ourselves of our dear friend Malcolm Knowles and what he had to say about adult andragogy. As I'm sure you remember, Dr. Knowles taught us that adult learners require not only a learning environment that harnesses their previous experiences, but also the appropriate readiness, a pressing need, and an immediate application of the knowledge they wish to acquire. Basically, adult learners need to be curious about what they're learning and connect it to their existing knowledge. Now, in a perfect world, you would only have to learn things that were deeply interesting and inspiring to you. But sadly, that's not the way the world currently works. Oftentimes, we have to learn a lot of topics that we simply don't find interesting, and even if the topic itself is interesting, there are a lot of elements or reading materials surrounding it that just aren't our cup of tea. Personally, I remember whining to one of my closest friends during college because I'd recently changed my major to a topic that was much more interesting to me, only to find that at least half of the articles in the introductory classes were just as boring as the ones in my previous major. To get around this, you should use your pre-reading time to inspire within yourself a burning curiosity or interest in what the text is about, and you should think about how you should apply it. If done properly, even the most uninteresting material, such as tax law, can benefit from this practice. Let's talk about some different ways we can actually do this. Technique number 1 is to envision yourself using the material. As you read throughout the text, you should try to envision scenarios in which it could affect your life or how you could actually benefit from having that knowledge. How would you use the knowledge in your day-to-day life? Of course, as we mentioned before, try to connect any markers you develop to existing knowledge or experiences in your long-term memory. Technique number 2, start asking questions. By developing your own questions and curiosities within the text, you're going to see a huge improvement in both reading and comprehension. Perhaps, for example, you see that the text mentions Baltimore, Maryland. Ask yourself, what the heck does Baltimore have to do with real estate law? What happened there? Was there maybe a precedent set? This trick alone is going to make you very motivated to read through the text and figure out just what the heck is going on. Furthermore, you should find things that don't seem to fit in and ask yourself what they're doing there. Technique number 3, consider different perspectives. When I was struggling with pre-reading, Dr. Lev gave me a tip that has stuck with me to this day. He told me to ask myself questions involving perspectives, mine, the author's, even third parties. Though I'm not yet reading the text itself, I'm seeing the keywords, and those keywords are enough to generate some pretty opinion-laden questions. These include, what viewpoint do I anticipate the author taking? What viewpoint do I have going into reading this article? Where might the author be wrong? Where am I open to being persuaded on this topic? How could this material be improved? What would critics of this article likely say? Who are some people I know who might agree or disagree with what this article likely says? What would I expect to see in this text that I'm not seeing at this speed? Now you might wonder how I could generate all of these questions without ever actually reading the chapter, but in fact it's pretty easy. Let's say, for example, you were reading an article about nutrition. Just by seeing which keywords, like paleo or grains or animal protein, cancer, obesity, or insulin, if I see that those words are being used, I can already tell a lot. And just by seeing which studies and which experts are being cited, I can tell even more. So before I ever actually read the article, I probably already know what stance the author is likely going to take. And based on that, I definitely know whether I agree or disagree. I may think of a few of my vegetarian or vegan friends at the same time and consider whether or not they'll turn blue in the face or love every word. I'll even consider where I feel the author may be biased, misinformed, or just plain wrong. As you can see, by the time you actually dive into reading the article at your normal speed, whatever that is, you'll have a lot of questions that you're very eager to answer. And this is a huge tool for concentration, comprehension, and retention. If you suffer from attention deficit disorder, you know that if you really want to know something, you can be laser focused. And after generating all of these perspectives and questions, you will be just that. If you really want to know why the heck Baltimore is in this text, you'll come back and you'll focus harder than you ever imagined you could focus on tax law. As you can imagine, there's a little bit of homework for this section. I want you to incorporate pre-reading, generating questions, imagining multiple perspectives, and curiosity into the things that you're normally reading. If you're a student, this means that you pick the most boring text from that econ class and you try to pre-read it. If you're at work, try doing the same. I want you to work on building that skill set that allows you to generate intense curiosity out of thin air. I want you to use your creativity skills to imagine multiple perspectives and even generate ideas as to how you could use the text in your day-to-day life. Perhaps it doesn't seem like it would make a big difference, but trust me, it does. Check out the PDF syllabus for a link to the pre-reading worksheet, which will help you understand and practice your pre-reading skills.
So now that we understand the importance of pre-reading for generating interest and curiosity and also getting our first basic markers that we'll be filling in with detail later, I want to take you guys really quickly just through the process of pre-reading with the Superlearner book. And the first step you want to do when you pre-read is if you have a paper book, you're just going to flip through it really quickly. If you have a digital book, you're kind of going to do the same thing. And I'm not really picking up anything in this first phase except for what are the words that repeat themselves and what's the format of the book. So obviously I'm going to realize really quickly in here that the word superlearner or superlearning repeats. The word memory, the word brain, even at this speed, you can probably see that these are words that just repeat over and over. And so those are not going to be good things to pay attention to because I'm going to get confused if I pay attention to those words since they appear over and over and over. I mean, look how many times memory is on this page. Okay, so now if we go back, and that was already all the way through to page 70, so it gives you an idea just how fast we're doing that. If we go back, let's go ahead and read the foreword of this book, and we're going to pre-read it. So, we get to the foreword. What are the first things we notice? And I just want to emphasize that this explanation is going to be about 1/100th of the speed that you're going to be doing this actual pre-reading at. Obviously, we notice forward. We're not going to notice Superlearner because that appears over and over. Now, you might be the type of person who notices numbers. I know Dr. Lev doesn't, but for me, 2008 is interesting, and I immediately start getting these WH questions. What happened in 2008? Why did it happen so long ago? I immediately go to Chicago. Okay, that's interesting. What's happening in Chicago? I think I see recession. Okay, that's interesting. What does a recession have to do with super learning? Quality job. Okay, that's interesting. I wonder what a quality job is to this person. I even wonder who this person is. Okay, and these things are all coming into my head in real time, but I want to methodically explain them to you. So let's see, we keep going. Okay, here we have brain. We ignore that one. That's not a word that means anything here because it repeats so much. On the couch reading, I definitely see that. Neurological diseases. Okay, that's interesting. What does this person care about neurological diseases? Alzheimer's. Okay, interesting. You'll see that I'm kind of zigzagging through. Kim Peek. Okay, that's very interesting because I know who Kim Peek is. So he's already a marker for me. I have an image of him already that I'm going to connect. And I want to ask myself, what does this author have to say about Kim Peek? What does he think that he's really smart? Does he think he's not smart? Rain Man. Okay, that makes sense because Kim Peek was the character that the movie was based on. Awesome. Rudiger Gam. Ooh, I don't know who that is. Is that someone like Kim Peek? Is it the guy who researched Kim Peek? At the speed that I would be pre-reading this, I would only pick up Rudiger Gam. So who is that? Why is he in here? Ben Pridmore. That's interesting. That's another guy. Why is he in here? What does he have to do with Kim Peek? Memorizing a deck of cards comes up to me, and 24.74 seconds. Now, again, just to hit pause, the types of questions that come up to me are, what happened in 24.74 seconds? Maybe it's some feat of memory. Maybe that's how fast he can read a page of a book. Really interesting. It starts generating questions to me, and I'm going to want to come back. I already have a marker of a stopwatch right there, and I'm going to remember I want to come back, and I want to pay special attention here to figure out what happened in just 24.74 seconds. Okay, continuing. Fascinating. That doesn't tell me anything. Ordinary people. That's interesting. Okay, are we now going to compare Kim Peek to ordinary people? Or what does ordinary people have to do with these superheroes who can, do these amazing things? Okay, poor memory. That's interesting. Seems like we just changed gears. Why did we change gears? Why did we do this complete about face? Grandmother, that's interesting. You can already start to get this curiosity. And if you're not reading as I go along in the video, you're probably wondering what the heck all these words have to do with one another. Increasingly failing memory. All right, that's interesting. Now, how are we going to compare these world record holder, savants, these autistic savants as it shows in the top of the page? How are they going to be compared? All right, let's keep going. Let's see, out of date. All right, that's interesting. Up here we go. Frustrating. Yeah, all right. What's frustrating? What was frustrating to the author? All right, super learning we don't notice. Although I do think it's interesting that super learning is capitalized here. I wonder why it's capitalized here. All right, what else? Digestible. That's interesting. For me, it's kind of weird that the word digestible is related to memory. All right, we keep going. Grandmother passes. Pick that up immediately. Miami. Okay, that's interesting. We were in Chicago, now we're in Miami. So you can already ask yourself why. You can keep going. Winning the championship. I see championship. That's interesting. I wonder what the championship is in. I wonder what this person has to do with the championship. 2010 and 2014. Change the way I live my life. Probably you wouldn't see that whole thing. All right, so already we have some really good curiosity, and then immediately I jump to Nelson Dellis, 4-time USA Memory Champion. That's interesting. There's a lot of questions that I've already generated over this pre-reading, and even though I would probably do this in about 4 or 5, maybe maximum 10 seconds, you can see that we have so many questions, and we're going to read this with such an intent interest, and we even have markers. Do you guys remember what our markers are? Well, we have Chicago, we have Kim Peek, we have neurological diseases, and we can already start populating those things, those markers, with detail when we read. And the idea behind pre-reading is that you do this in large sections. So normally you wouldn't just pre-read 3 pages, you might read 10 or 20, and then you'll really have a bunch of curiosity that'll take you all the way through the chapter.